Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look for ways we can work together to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ. Today we have with us Tennessee Representative William Slater. He represents District 35, that's Trousdale, and part of Sumner County, which I live in Sumner County, but not the part that he represents. But anyway, he is here with us today. He's on several committees: the Local Government Committee, Cities and Counties Subcommittee, K through 12 Subcommittee, and actually the Vice Chair of the Education Administrative Committee. So he's hit the ground running in the Tennessee legislature, and it's so good to have you here with us today, Mr. Slater.
Well, hey, it's great to be here with you. And as you know, I'm a freshman legislator, so this is my first time out. We just finished up session week before last, and it's been very busy. If anyone's watched even the national news, Tennessee is hit a lot of the national media outlets, and whether that's good, bad, or ugly, I'm not sure, but at any rate, it has been an interesting first session for sure.
So you've hit the ground running, and people may not understand, as soon as you're elected, you're off. And so tell us a bit about that. You're elected on election night, and what's that been like to be a legislature, a state legislature?
Yeah, so you are, as soon as the election results are in on the night of the election, then you become the state representative here in Tennessee. And but then you're not actually sworn in until January when the session starts. I think January the 10th is when I was sworn in. And like most state legislatures, you start a session in January. We're what's called a part-time legislature, meaning that we don't meet 12 months out of the year. We usually start in January, finish up about this time of the year, late April, early May. This year, we ended up in about mid-April, finished our business. And constitutionally, the state constitution, we have one job to do, and that's to pass a balanced budget in Tennessee. And so we passed a budget, and then we've been adjourned from this session of the legislature. But it's been very exciting. I think I was quite ready for what would take place because I've been engaged politically now for over 30 years. In fact, my wife and I, we met and married in Florida. When we lived in Florida, I would go to Tallahassee, and I sat down with my state representative, my state senator, when there were issues that were important to me. And important issues especially were focused on religious liberty issues and Christian education issues. When we moved here in 1996, one of the very first things that I did was to meet my state representative, my state senator. And once again, I'd go to Nashville, go to the Capitol, and I'd speak with them, especially on religious liberty and Christian education issues. So I was a little bit used to being on the other side of the desk, and now folks come to see me and share their concerns with me, but I've been sharing my concerns with my representatives for years now.
And so listeners are thinking, well, tonight I'm going to pick your cable news channel, and I'm going to focus on what's happening in the United States Senate or the United States House of Representatives. But really, since you've been involved first as a constituent in Florida and now as a constituent and a representative, it's really about the state, isn't it?
Well, and one of the things that we need to remember is that the federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government. And so it really is at the state level where we need to be engaged. It's probably pretty tough for someone to be able to meet and have an audience with the president. Mm-hmm. It's even difficult to have an audience with your congressman or your U.S. senator. But you can know your state representatives, and truthfully, you're impacted more by what takes place at the state level and at the local level on a day-to-day basis than even at the federal level. We tend to gravitate because the national news outlets, they end up looking basically at the federal level. But the truth of the matter is that what impacts us the most is at the state and the local level. And so I think it's very important to be engaged. And that's really what God called me to decades ago, not just when he called me to run for office at the state level now, but decades ago. I've always stayed in that state lane. I've known what's going on federally at the national level. I've kept my ear to the ground when it comes to local, knowing mayors and county commissioners and that type of thing. But really, God has called me to that state lane, is the way that I call it. And I think that folks need to prayerfully consider. Every Christian, in my opinion, should be engaged in the political process. God has placed us here in the United States. Our government is we the people, and we should make sure that our voices are heard at each level of government, local, state, and then the national government as well.
So you've already alluded to that you feel like God has kind of put you or prepared you to be in the position that you're in right now. Mm-hmm. So you're really getting into like a Christian citizen, what the Christian's responsibility is. And so I'm listening into this podcast and I'm thinking, I'm busy. I don't have time to vote for a school board or I'll get focused on the national election, maybe not so much the primary. Talk a bit about that and what a Christian's responsibility is in a government like we have.
Yeah, and so first of all, our responsibility is to pray for our leaders, and I covet prayers in the role that I have, and we're very fortunate here in Tennessee, and I know not all of our listeners are in Tennessee, but we truthfully in Tennessee are very fortunate because at the state level, we have many Christians who we literally join hands in prayer for each other and for the citizens of Tennessee. And I would suspect that that's true in other states as well at the state level. So we need to be in prayer for our officials, local, state, and then our federal officials as well. But then I think it's very important for us to vote. But when I say vote, I don't mean just going out and voting every 4 years in a presidential election. We need to make sure that we get out and vote every single time there's an election. And let me emphasize the importance of primary elections. And we would call them off-year primary elections. What do I mean by that? I mean those elections when an off year is when it's not a presidential election. For example, 2022. I ran in 2022. There was a primary, just like there would be anywhere. The primary really is where the decision was made who was going to be the state representative. Now, here's why. And it wouldn't be this way in every single place. But in many places, oftentimes, if there's a district that is leaning with one party or the other, or it may be that there's not even a political party represented in the primary. That was the case with me. There was only one party that was represented in the primary, but I had two opponents. It was a 3-person race. So truthfully, the decision was made in the primary who would represent the people of the 35th District. And God blessed. I like to say that we worked hard enough to win by one vote. It was God's favor that gave us such a convincing win, especially when we had 2 other very good candidates. But I have no doubt that God wanted us there. But voting in the primary election the primaries is very important. I'll illustrate it this way. I won in the primary with just over 3,000 votes, which was twice as many votes as both of my opponents. When it came to the general election, I won with 13,000 votes because I had no opponent.
Yeah.
You know how many votes I needed to win that election? I only needed one.
Yeah.
All I had to do was convince my wife to go out and vote for me, and I would have been. So as you can see, and that's true in many communities, especially in rural areas, it's very important to get out and vote in the primaries. And I can't emphasize that enough.
And so in the rural situations, and really like the situation you're in, I vote, and I also need to know you.
Yes.
And so I'm busy. Maybe I'm a mom, and I've got kids in school, but I really need to know because you're involved in what's happening as far as school policy and so forth. How do I get to know you as my representative?
Yeah, great question. You know, when I was just getting started out as a young man, and I read a book, and I'd give credit if I knew who the author was. But I read a book, and it said this: if you would like to have the influence of 10,000 people, simply write your congressman. And the reason that the author said that is because only 1 in 10,000 people would actually write their congressman. Now, times have changed, and writing letters is not the way that we communicate. So to me, and for me as a legislator, the most impactful statements that I receive are actually, I receive them right on this phone in a text message. So I would say to our listeners that the goal should be that you would know your elected or those that are running. You should know your elected officials well enough that you have their cell phone number and you can text them when there's something important to you. So back to your question, how do you do that? Well, if you're a pastor, one of the things that I think that's important to do is to invite elected officials to your church services. Or if there's a campaign going on and you certainly want to be fair, then invite each of the candidates to a church service. Let them know that you just would like them to come, and so that your folks can pray for them and so that they can greet the folks. And you don't even have to have them to speak. It doesn't hurt if you let them speak, but you don't have to have them speak, but they come right to your church. Folks can shake hands with them. Another way outside of the church itself is get involved in things like the local Chamber of Commerce. I'm a huge proponent of churches being members of their local Chamber of Commerce. It doesn't mean that you have to compromise on any issues. That gives you opportunity to shake hands with business leaders, professional leaders in your community. You really get to know folks there. When it comes to elected officials, that's a place where they go as well. You can shake their hand. I have no problem if someone asks me for my cell phone number, I will give it out to them. And those individuals who have my cell phone number, who text me on an issue, they end up getting my attention. My assistant is Chelsea Rackley, and Chelsea was one of my former students, and she does a fantastic job. But it's her job to go through my emails every day. On a slow day, probably today will be slow because we're out of session. There may be 25, 30 emails that'll come in. But when we're in session, we had over 600 emails come in one day. Be honest with you, I cannot read every single one of those emails. Chelsea goes through them. She sorts through them, pro and con on a particular issue. But when someone shoots me a text, someone like a pastor, or someone like a business leader in town, and they say, you know what, I am for this or I'm against this, that truly gets my attention. That is that 1 in 10,000 message that really speaks to an elected official.
So our people really have more influence than they really know. Is the importance of taking advantage of that. But also, you mentioned prayer. It's important for them to be praying, and who knows, you're inviting a legislator to be there with you. Who knows what could happen? And also, though, they need to pray for these administrative assistants too, that these legislator assistants like Chelsea, because they've got a really important job trying to highlight what you should pay attention to and not.
Yes. Well, in fact, I mentioned to you for decades, I've been going to state capitals. And one of the things that I learned very early on, that oftentimes it's more important to know the legislative assistant, know him or her, even more than the representative themselves. And in fact, to make sure that you share with them your position, they actually are the ones that are marking down. And that's the larger the body is or the group is, for example, at the national level, much more important. If you're communicating with your congressman or your U.S. senator, it's good to let the legislative assistant know. That even means more than sitting down with the individual themselves. You know, we have a representative government. We have a constitutional republic. And the word republic means representative. So at the local level, it may be a board of mayor of aldermen, or it may be a city council, depending on the structure of the local government. At county government, typically county commissioners. But at each level of government, folks are representatives. And I can assure you, I'm with representatives all the time at different levels of government. We honestly, good ones, honestly, they want to know what people are thinking. I had someone share with me some advice, a seasoned representative. And they said to me, that the most difficult bill that you will vote on is the one where you don't hear from any of your constituents. And you know, that's exactly the truth. On the floor of the House, we have a system where you push a button. You've got red, you've got green, you've got blue for present not voting, and then you can call a page with the yellow button. And there have been times where I've been seated at my desk and I have literally thought, I wonder what the folks back home, I'm representing them. What would the folks back home think about this particular issue? We had over 1,500 bills that were introduced in the House this year. There's no way that you can know what the folks back home would like on 1,500 different bills. Representatives want to hear from their constituents. Pastors are automatically leaders in their community, and I'm not sure that every pastor completely recognizes the fact that just by being a pastor of a local church, that they already have influence and they already have an audience with their representatives. And so it's important for us to be engaged. You know, the title of this podcast is Better Together. Is that correct? And I think that we're better together when we recognize the fact that, yes, churches engaged with their local representatives, we're better together when we do that. We want to impact the community. And I think that you'll find that there are so many representatives who love the Lord, who want to do what's right. But oftentimes the voices, their voices are crowded out by those who don't. And we have to recognize the fact that we do live in an evil age, and we do live in a culture that is going headlong away from the things of Christ. One of the things that is so encouraging to me is when I get a text and just somebody says, "Hey, I'm praying for you," and that is it's so uplifting, because it can grind on you, because we hear a lot of noise from those who would go against what the gospel brings to us and what the Bible says. And those of us who are in office, who love the Lord, who want to do what's right, it's encouraging to hear from folks.
That's good. So we know we pray for representatives. We know we're trying to be involved. And one last thing, we've talked in the past about how even something like the presidency, you try your best to meet the people that will be running and try to be able to look them in the eyes. You know, I'm sure many of our listeners are like, how can that happen? But that's what you're kind of getting at. You can do more than you think you can do. Help walk our listeners through that a little bit about that kind of influence, which people would probably be surprised by.
Yeah, and you can meet folks. I used to have a policy. I would know when it was election day or getting close to election day, even years ago, because my phone would start ringing. And this was before cell phones and that type of thing. My phone would start ringing and I'd get a question, hey, who am I supposed to vote for? And so I have answered that question time and time again. And so a number of years ago, I decided I would never recommend someone unless I had shaken their hand and looked them in the eye, except for president, because I thought, well, there's just no way that I'm going to be able to do that. But now I've even changed that to where I say, okay, if I'm going to vote for someone, even as president, I'm going to do my best to meet them. And here's what ends up happening, going back to that earlier conversation we had about primaries. In the early days, a year out, right now, folks are lining up to get ready for 2024 presidential election. And folks that are looking to run for president, they'll hit places, they'll hit states, and they'll go to I can't tell you how many presidential candidates I've met, and there's only been 20, 30 people there. And these are not high-end, high-dollar fundraising events. These are at little cafes. They're at restaurants. And I've shaken their hands. I've looked at them in the eye, or at least I've been able to get close enough to them to where I can see in their eye whether or not they're a person of integrity or not. Folks, just regular old folks. I'm just a regular old folk. That's all I am. I'm just regular folks that made it part of what I believe God would have all of us to do, and that is to be engaged with our government and meet folks. And you can meet them. You keep your ear to the ground. Listen for those the partisan type meetings, and listen to those candidate forums. And it does take commitment, like anything that we do in life, and anything really that, God didn't say he's going to make the path always easy. We're even supposed to study his word to show ourselves approved. It's just not on a silver platter. So it does take engagement. It does take some
work.
Yes, it takes work, and it takes a commitment to do that.
So you're listening to this podcast, you're thinking, oh, I know someone that needs this. We encourage you to take it, share it with them. And what you've talked to us about is really important, especially in the situation we're in right now, to help us to be salt and light in our environment. So thank you so much, Mr. Slater, for your good work and for taking the time to share with us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And thank you, listeners, for everything you're doing. Remember, share this podcast with those that you can. Remember, every little thing we do helps, and we truly are better together. Thank you.